today by Elliot Ginsburg from Hop Law and more recently from Chronic Lawyers. Usually we keep the booze hidden away when we do these videos, but in honor of having a liquor lawyer here with us, we thought we would pull it out. Cheers. Cheers to you. So, you may have read the blog post that we posted yesterday on the Blunt Strategies website that Elliot wrote about the kind of contentious relationship between the alcohol industry and the emerging cannabis industry, and especially legalized marijuana. We're really excited to have Elliot join us today so we can talk more in depth about this issue. Elliot, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Hop Law, first of all?
Sure. Hop Law is a subset of the firm Garner & Ginsburg, PA, and we represent breweries, distilleries, and wineries from all over the country on any number of matters, from things like trademark issues, employment issues, to financing and business formation. It came out of, I happen to know a couple people that were starting breweries, and it's grown from there over the past 5 or so years, 6 years maybe.
And more recently, you launched another subset of your business called Chronic Lawyers.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So, I've had a great time getting into the industry on the alcoholic beverage side. It tends to be a lot of really interesting people, small businesses, and I really sort of have a passion for helping them out. I see the same sort of thing coming on with marijuana. It's not legal yet in Minnesota, but I think the writing's on the wall. I think it's coming. And I've done a little bit of work here and there for people in other states on regulatory matters, and thought that I could develop sort of a practice around it. The marijuana industry in a lot of states is regulated in a similar way to the alcohol beverage industry, with different tiers and restrictions and regulations on how many tiers you can be involved in. So I think it was sort of a natural progression for us.
Tell us a bit more about that tiered approach to alcohol regulation, because you're right, it does seem to be oftentimes the model that states look to when looking to regulate marijuana.
Yeah, so when it comes to alcoholic beverages, there are 3 tiers. There's the production tier, the distribution tier, and the retail tier. And the whole purpose of setting these tiers up was to avoid what's called tied houses, where you essentially have vertical integration where someone owns the brewery, the distributor, and the retail facility. Now, what happens as a result of something like vertical integration in the alcohol space, you can see sort of in the UK, they don't have a lot of regulation around the 3-tier system, and so you have large brewers that buy up retail spaces, which increases costs, or increases prices, I should say. It actually decreases costs and reduces consumer choice. And in the United States, after Prohibition ended, the states, I believe every state came up with some sort of variation on the 3-tier model. In the marijuana space, it's been a little bit more piecemeal from state to state. They have a manufacturing, or I guess cultivation tier, which would be the farmers in a lot of places, as well as a distribution tier and a retail tier. But there are also tiers sort of within that 3-tiered structure, like processors that make the products out of the actual marijuana plant. And there's also lab testing facilities that sort of occupy a separate tier to regulate what's in and what is used on the marijuana as it's grown.
So this is an instance where perhaps the similarities between the 2 products has created some kind of growing pains between the 2 industries. So the guest blog post that you wrote focused on how, especially some of the larger incumbent interests in the alcohol industry really have not only been resistant to legalization, but have actually invested resources in trying to stop marijuana legalization. What has the relationship been like, though, for the more craft end of the alcohol industry?
It's a great question. So you see a lot of the big breweries, you're right, pushing against legalization. Some of the craft breweries, while they might see some potential competition from legal marijuana, you see them adapting more early on, partially because they're more nimble and able to do that. New Belgium, a brewery in Colorado, craft brewery that I believe is employee owned, came out with a beer called Hemperor, and it's a hemp-based beer. It's actually really fantastic, and they've been pushing that in their markets. I understand pretty successfully. Other craft breweries, actually there's one, Lagunitas, which is one of the larger breweries, is actually owned by Heineken now. They've started developing their own THC and CBD beverages without alcohol and branding them using the Lagunitas brand. And I've heard from clients interested in doing similar things. They have the equipment, they know how to make beverages, they know how to market, they have distribution networks built in. So there's a lot of, I think, while there certainly is going to be increasing competition for sort of the psychoactive market, I think you're going to see a lot of craft brewers finding opportunities where they otherwise might face only competition if they remain stagnant.
Yeah, so you raised the beer that New Belgium is making that is a hemp-based beer and has an alcohol content. But then we're seeing other companies, so like Indeed, for example, has a CBD seltzer that they're now making. Tell us about, is it something regulatory that is preventing breweries from creating products that have both alcohol and CBD?
Yeah. So in order to make a new sort of beer with different ingredients, and we'll call them unique ingredients, you have to get what's called formula approval from the Tax and Trade Bureau. And the Tax and Trade Bureau is a federal agency. The Food and Drug Administration still has not permitted CBD for human consumption. And so if anybody applies for formula approval with CBD, odds are it's going to be refused. So I think that's probably the main reason you're not seeing, a CBD infused alcoholic beer.
Gotcha. Would you say that here in Minnesota, I mean, the sentiment that we've kind of gotten here in Minnesota, working in the cannabis space, has been, especially for Minnesota's craft brewing community, kind of a receptiveness to cannabis being an area that opens up opportunity for collaboration or some innovation of products. Are you seeing that as kind of a unique Minnesota ethos, or is this true in other states as well?
I think it's happening across the board. For a while now, we've already seen a number of breweries, particularly craft breweries, sort of brand themselves towards the marijuana consumer. So even though they don't have necessarily a cannabis-infused product, they take a lot of the cannabis culture and use that for marketing purposes. And again, Lagunitas is a big one. They have Waldo's Ale, which is in reference to a group of cannabis users that were pushing for legalization decades ago. And so I think we're going to see more of that, and I think we are going to see breweries, particularly craft breweries throughout the country, start to sort of push into that cannabis beverage space, because again, they've got the knowledge, they've got the distribution. It's just a matter of putting it all together.
Well, thanks so much, Elliot, for joining us. This was all really interesting. We're certainly interested in seeing here in Minnesota how the both craft alcohol space and more broadly the alcohol space, how they can help us in sort of advocacy towards legalization and in the creation of new products and new lines of business and employment here in Minnesota. And we'd love to have you back to learn more as the space develops.
Yeah, that's great. And as you know, there are some craft breweries in Minnesota that have already supported Murmur, which is the advocacy group pushing for legalization. I think there's a lot of room to build those relationships.
Absolutely. Thanks again.